I never thought a real estate bargain could nearly ruin my life. It started with a listing that looked too good to be true. An abandoned mountain house perched near the ridge of Silver Pine Valley. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2 acres of forest. Price tag, $15,000. After my father passed, I wanted a project, something to fix, something to keep my mind busy. I'd spent 20 years restoring old homes, but this one felt personal. It looked peaceful, surrounded by trees and silence, the kind of place where you could breathe again. The locals said no one had lived there for years. The owner, some retired pilot, had died without family. The house went to county auction. I made the only bid. That was 6 months ago. When I finally returned to start renovations, I expected dust, cobwebs, and silence. Instead, I found smoke rising from the chimney. At first, I thought maybe a storm chaser or a hiker had broken in. But when I pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw kids' bicycles, a freshly painted porch, and a new mailbox with the name The Millers. My name isn't Miller. I froze halfway out of my truck, my heart hammering. The curtains were drawn. There were flower pots on the porch, fresh ones with blooming daisies. The whole place looked lived in. I grabbed my deed and walked up to the door, still thinking maybe I had the wrong address. Before I could knock, the door opened. A blonde woman in yoga pants holding a coffee mug looked me up and down like I was selling vacuum cleaners. "Can I help you?" she said, fake smile plastered on her face. Yeah," I stammered. "This is my property." I held up the deed. "I bought it 6 months ago from the county." She laughed. "Oh, sweetie," she said, sipping her coffee. "We've been living here for nearly a year. Adverse possession laws. You might want to look them up." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You're telling me you just moved into my house and decided it's yours?" "Moved in?" she repeated, pretending to think. No, we maintained it. Saved it from rotting away. You're welcome." Then she shut the door in my face. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Apparently she'd called the cops. On me. Deputy Collins stepped out, hand on his belt, and went straight to her like they were old friends. "Karen Miller," she said sweetly. "This man's been harassing us. Claims we're trespassing." I handed the deputy my deed, my voice shaking with anger. "Sir, I legally bought this property at auction. She has no right to be here." He glanced at the paper, sighed, and handed it back. "Even if you did, sir, you can't just kick people out. They've been living here. That makes it a civil matter. You'll need to file for eviction in court. She's a squatter," I shouted. "Sir," he said firmly. "Lower your voice." Karen put on a trembling act, her eyes glistening. "He's scaring my kids," she whispered. The deputy turned to me, jaw tight. "Leave the property. If you come back, I'll have to arrest you for harassment." I drove down that mountain, shaking with rage and disbelief. That night, I barely slept. My brain was on fire. How could someone steal your house in broad daylight and have the law back them up? I started digging online. Property records, social media, local groups. And guess what? Karen Miller wasn't her real name. Her name was Karen Davis, and she'd pulled the same stunt twice before. Caretaking abandoned houses and using adverse possession as a shield. The next morning, I hired a lawyer, Erin Blake, a sharp woman who'd seen this exact scam before. "She's playing the long game," Erin said. "If she can prove she's lived there openly and continuously for 12 months, she can file for possession. You need to act fast. We filed an eviction notice that day, but that's when Karen went to war. Within a week, posts appeared on the local Facebook page. Heartless developer trying to evict a single mother from her home. Corporate greed strikes again. People I'd never met were calling me a monster. Karen had pictures of her kids playing in my yard with captions like, "They just want a safe home. Please help us fight eviction." Donations started pouring into her GoFundMe. Thousands of dollars. I was furious. But Erin said, "Let her talk. Every post she makes becomes evidence of fraud." Still, it was hard watching the town turn against me. When I stopped by the hardware store, the cashier wouldn't meet my eyes. The local diner refused me service. I was the villain in Karen's made-up story. A few nights later, I drove back up to the property, just to see it. The lights were on. Laughter drifted out from inside. My living room. I parked 100 feet away, and watched through the window. Karen's husband, a guy in his 30s with a beer belly and a neck tattoo, was watching TV. A teenage boy was scrolling through his phone on my couch. They looked completely at home. Then something caught my eye. A camera. Mounted right above my door. She'd installed security cameras. On my property, I took pictures, then left. Aaron said not to confront them. Let the evidence pile up. But the next morning, I found my truck vandalized. The word thief spray-painted across the hood. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just a squatter. She was dangerous. 2 weeks later, Erin called me. "Something interesting came up," she said. "Your property taxes for the last 6 months?" "Someone paid them. Who?" I asked. She hesitated. "Karen Davis." It was a clever trick, paying taxes under her name to make her residency look legitimate. But it was also tax fraud. We turned it over to the county. Meanwhile, I drove up the mountain again, quietly this time. I wanted proof. Real proof. I snuck around back and found the basement door cracked open. Inside, the house smelled like bleach and mold. Boxes lined the walls, labeled Airbnb supplies. I nearly dropped my phone when I realized what I was looking at. She was renting my house as an Airbnb. There were printed reviews pinned to the wall. "Lovely family, quiet stay. Perfect weekend cabin." I filmed everything. Every box, every receipt. That footage changed everything. We handed the evidence to the sheriff's office and county prosecutor. Fraud, tax evasion, illegal rental operation, the works. When the news broke, it spread fast. Local reporters swarmed the property. Karen tried to play the victim again, giving tearful interviews about losing her home. But this time, the truth was on my side. Turns out Karen had scammed multiple families before, taking over foreclosed homes, pretending to be the rightful owner, and milking donations. The county found over $20,000 in undeclared Airbnb income linked to her name. A week later, deputies arrived at dawn with eviction papers and arrest warrants. She screamed the whole time, "You'll regret this. This is my home! You can't do this to me." Her husband tried to block the door, but they cuffed him too, for vandalism and resisting arrest. Watching them get escorted off my porch was the sweetest sight I've ever seen. The house was trashed. Holes in the walls, broken windows, garbage everywhere. It looked like a war zone, but it was mine again. With help from a few neighbors, the same ones who'd believed her lies, we started fixing it. Funny how people come around once they see the truth. Even the sheriff who'd once threatened to arrest me came by. "Guess I owe you an apology," he said, shaking his head. We laughed about it, eventually. It took me 6 months and every spare dollar I had, but I rebuilt that house. Repainted walls, new floors, fixed the roof myself. Now, when I sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the peaks, I think about that first day, the smoke from my chimney, the stranger at my door, and how close I came to losing everything. Karen taught me something important. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears yoga pants and carries a coffee mug. If you're buying an abandoned property, check the records twice. Install cameras. Visit often. And if someone's already living there when you arrive, call a lawyer before you call the cops. Because people like Karen, they don't just steal homes. They steal your peace.